If you think Nick Saban retiring means the end of the Alabama dynasty, Kalen DeBoer is about to make you look so foolish because this is nothing but a passing of the torch. This is the equivalent to when the Green Bay Packers went from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. Kalen DeBoer is the second best head coach in college football right now. There's not a single head coach in the country that has done more with less than what Kalen DeBoer has done the 2 seasons he was up there with the Washington Huskies. He went 25-3, led them to a national championship in year 2, and most of those guys he didn't even recruit. So I can definitely see Kalen DeBoer 6 months from now on Monday in early January raising up that national trophy or that national championship trophy for the Crimson Tide, because although they lost a lot of talent to the draft and the transfer portal, they still have the second overall best roster in America according to 24/7 Sports. He also brings in the third ranked portal class. You got Jalen Milroe coming back at quarterback. Him and Jalen Milroe are going to be a deadly combination this year. There's a sentiment that Jalen Milroe isn't going to be a good fit in Kalen DeBoer's system, but that's a giant misconception. If you watch Washington's offense last year, a lot of what made Michael Penix so successful at Washington was how well he threw the ball downfield outside of the numbers. He was a really good deep ball thrower. That's the same thing that Jalen Milroe is, a really good deep ball thrower. As a matter of fact, he's probably a better deep ball thrower than he is when it comes to throwing the ball in the short intermediate areas of the field. And with Kalen DeBoer being able to help Michael Penix improve, I can only imagine he's going to be able to do the same thing for Jalen Milroe. You're going to see Jalen Milroe become a way better all-around and more polished quarterback under Kalen DeBoer's tutelage. He's going to be a way better offensive mind than what he had last year with Tommy Rees, who kind of limited his ceiling to a certain extent. The wide receiver room got hit hard with the losses of Jermaine Burton to the NFL. Isaiah Bond went to Texas, but there still is a lot of talent in that wide receiver room. They got nothing but 5- and 4-star guys down there. You had a few wide receivers who followed Kalen DeBoer from UW down to Tuscaloosa. That receiver room is going to be really fun to watch. They got a lot of speed down there, a lot of dynamic playmakers who are going to make a lot of things happen in the vertical passing game. Their running back position is absolutely insane. My favorite running back that they have is number 26. I can't remember his name, but I was watching Alabama spring game, and I was like, damn, this 26 dude is nice. Really good vision, great contact balance. He reminds me a lot of Bucky Irving from Oregon. Alabama may have one of the most underrated and one of the best running back rooms in the SEC. Everybody's talking about how good the passing game is going to be for Alabama, but Kalen DeBoer, the rushing attack he had at Washington wasn't too shabby, but I can only imagine how good his offense is going to be with him being able to be more well-balanced, throwing the ball and running the football with the same talent he has in the running back room. Plus, you couple that with Jalen Milroe's athleticism and what he brings to your rushing attack, Alabama's offense is going to be really unstoppable this year. Another thing is that the offensive line for the last 3-4 years has been a big Achilles heel for the Crimson Tide. That's not going to happen anymore this season. They should have one of the best offensive lines in college football, at least top 10 at worst. There were at least a couple of offensive linemen or two that followed Kalen DeBoer from Washington to Alabama as well. They were pretty good. You got Caden Proctor back after he oddly transferred to Iowa and then transferred back down to Tuscaloosa. That probably was one of the weirdest transfers of the transfer portal era, but who cares? He's back at Alabama now, so it doesn't matter. The defense. I definitely do expect there to be a drop-off because Nick Saban is one of the greatest head coaches in the history of this sport, but also probably the best defensive mind that college football has ever seen. So it's only right to expect this defense to drop off a little bit, and you lose Dallas Turner, Chris Boswell, Kool-Aid and Terry Arnold to the NFL. You also lost Caleb Downs to Ohio State via the portal, but there still is talent there, especially on the front seven. Will your front seven be as good as what it was in 2024? Maybe not, but I can still see this defensive line and the linebackers playing at a pretty high level. You got Quandarius Robinson coming back, Jahil Campbell and Deontay Lawson return. You got LT Overton via the portal. Malachi Moore is still there in the secondary. He was one of the better defensive backs in the nation last year. You got a really good cornerback out of USC and Dormani Jackson, who has a lot of untapped potential. I feel like USC didn't really do a good job of maximizing this dude's skill set, but under Kalen DeBoer and their new defensive coordinator, Kane Womack, who is a former Burroughs Award finalist, I feel like we're going to see the best of Dormani Jackson playing for the Crimson Tide. And you got a true freshman that they've been raving about all throughout spring camp, and Xavier Brown, who's expected to start for them this year, according to the multiple depth charts that I looked at for the Tide. He was the third best cornerback from the 2024 recruiting cycle. So overall, from a talent standpoint, everything is there for Kalen DeBoer to win it all year one at Tuscaloosa. And their schedule isn't that difficult. They got to play Georgia at home. But before you play the Bulldogs, you get to play Western Kentucky, USF, Wisconsin on the road. You should be undefeated before you go into that game against Georgia. And I'd like you to win that game. Georgia's kryptonite is Alabama. And I don't see that changing with Nick Saban leaving, because Kalen DeBoer was mopping the floor with Dan Lanning, who was a Kirby Smart disciple. And he also is 10-1 against top 25 teams. If you talk about one of the best head coaches when it comes to big games, it doesn't get any better than Kalen DeBoer. And yeah, of course, Kirby Smart is also really good in these big time games, but you got to remember that Georgia's schedule is really tough this year, because you got 3 road games against 3 of pretty much the best teams in the SEC, not named Georgia. On the road against Bama, on the road against Texas and Ole Miss. Georgia's going to drop at least 1 or 2 of those games, and it's hard to win at Alabama. Alabama has only lost like a handful of games over the last decade. You got to be a damn good team to beat Alabama on the road, and Georgia definitely is good enough to get the job done, but I would like to see Alabama probably walk away with the W in that game, most likely. Okay, Kalen DeBoer is just that good of a head coach. I don't think that Kirby Smart and Georgia are going to get one up on them when they got to play in Tuscaloosa. And then you got to play Missouri at home. That's probably your second toughest home game of the season. You should be able to win that one. Missouri is insanely overrated. And their next 3 toughest road games after they play Wisconsin early in the year is at Tennessee, at LSU in Death Valley. Then you got to go to Norman to square it down with the Sooners. All 3 of those games should be winnable. Tennessee could be a tough out. They're going to be really good. They're going to have arguably the best defensive line in the nation. LSU probably still isn't going to have a defense this year. And I love Oklahoma. Oklahoma could pull off the upset, but I could see Alabama rolling in that game. The ceiling for Alabama this year under Kalen DeBoer is 12-0 potentially, winning the SEC and winning the national championship. And you're not crazy to believe that. If he was able to win with Chris Peterson's guys in 2 seasons at Washington, and remember, he did more in the 2 seasons he was at UW than what Chris Peterson did, spending way more years there. So imagine what he's going to be able to do with the talent that he's inheriting at Alabama from Nick Saban. We seem to forget that Alabama's last couple of recruiting classes have been top 3, top 5 at worst. This is still one of the best, most complete teams, not just in this conference, but in college football. And if Nick Saban never retired, Alabama probably would have been the favorite to win the SEC this year. The favorites over Bama are Georgia and Texas, and we've already seen Kalen DeBoer get the better of Steve Sarkisian. Alabama's schedule is favorable. You're going to have a great offensive line. Jalen Milroe is going to be tremendously improved as an all-around quarterback under Kalen DeBoer. You got a really talented running back room, a lot of depth at wide receiver. I don't see Alabama losing any more than 10 games this year. The possible losses could be to Georgia at home, and they possibly could drop a road game against Tennessee or LSU on the road. But ultimately, Alabama to me is a lock for the playoffs this year. But the upside with this team is natty. And anything less, I would be a little bit disappointed if Kalen DeBoer won less than 10 games this year. That's how good of a head coach this dude is. I get that he has a lot of expectation and a lot of pressure because he's replacing the greatest head coach of this, not even this era, but to ever coach college football. I get that. But pressure doesn't define a head coach. Okay, at the end of the day, you got to go out there and you got to win those games. And Kalen DeBoer, in 2 years at Washington, went 25-3, 10-1 against top 10 teams and took them to a natty, despite having a way less talented roster than what he had to work with going into this season. I expect Alabama to be in a national championship conversation. I expect them to go far in the playoffs, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them win it all this year.